couple little tearjerker moments for me watching a couple of those. I'm not afraid to admit. The big kind of stringing theme that we've been talking a lot today has been story, and we spoke with Greg McGillivray earlier, and your three films specifically have such a nice tone and story. So I want to get into maybe the impetus and how you came across the story and how it just kind of came to be for you to covering it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Well, I've been friends with Ben Moon since 2004, 2005, so I've known him for a long time and been around him through all his ups and downs and all that. And oddly enough, the car company, if you've seen the truck out there, Rivian, they approached me with the idea of making a short film on Ben Moon. And obviously I was honored, and I know all about it and what he's gone through with cancer and stuff. So it's kind of perfect timing because a lot of time's passed, and he just finished writing his book. And so he had rehashed a lot of things and gone through a lot in the last year writing that. So it just coincided perfect.
And did he find the filming aspect of it and then having to do that, the voiceover, was it cathartic for him? Was it something that was difficult?
I don't think it was, because he'd spent so much time writing that book. I think that was more cathartic for him. Easy for us because he kind of had all this hashed out in his head. So when we did the interviews for the voiceovers, he was really clear on what he wanted to say. There's definitely some, right away when I got that call from Rivian, I called Ben, and part of the thing that he has to deal with his whole life is having the colostomy bag taped to his stomach, because he lost his colon cancer. So that's something I haven't seen in a lot of these films, is that part of the reality. It's something you don't want to talk about. So I asked him if he was comfortable with us dealing with that. And because you can talk about cancer and all that, but then you see that, and you're like, oh, that's what he has to deal with every day. So when he's packing his things to go, he's got his surfboard, his climbing bag, and he's got his fully organized colostomy bag set for the trip, So we talked a lot about that because that's something I wanted to show because it's very powerful, and I knew he was sensitive about it. And he just, I said, we'll show it, we'll film it, and if it looks okay, then, it's up to you. Well, if it doesn't look good, we don't have to use it. So that was probably the most sensitive part, And I think it worked out the way we did it. It just kind of looks like you're like a voyeur a little bit, and you're kind of off in a distance, and he's getting ready to go.
Tastefully done. Tastefully done.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it was a team effort.
Yeah.
Sure.
Chris, I do want to say, second time watching Unnur, better, even second time watching. We talked a little bit last night. Those of you that were lucky enough to make the opening night out on the fairway was really cool. We got to see your other film. But yeah, if you can maybe, for those that weren't here, and just maybe dive down a little bit into the details of how you came across the story of the surf photographer and his daughter. I know, because those that know your work, they know you spend a lot of time in Iceland, maybe your second home almost.
Yeah, Ellie Thor is a good friend of mine. I met him maybe 8 years ago in Iceland. We were on a surf trip, and he was a local, and he knows all the best waves. And if anybody's spent any time researching or exploring waves in remote places, you know that befriending the locals is probably the best way to score. So it was advantageous. We had kind of a mutual friendship and kind of brotherhood there. And I remember at one point we were taking this really long road trip from Akureyri, or from Reykjavik to Akureyri, and like you do, you just start telling stories. And he told me this story about him, getting trapped behind this waterfall and being behind the curtain and not being able to penetrate through, and basically trying again and again and again, and then going so deep that he passed out, and that his body was found down the road. And I remember him looking over, and my jaw's just on the ground. I'm like, what? You died? you died and came back to life? And he's like, yeah. He's like, basically, this is what happened in my childhood. And you know, what's interesting about Icelanders is they're super isolated and they have this beautiful country, but they travel a lot. Like he spent most of his childhood traveling to Nepal and going all over the place. Like it's really, really something popular for them to do. And so he's explored and skied everywhere and just lived this really adventurous lifestyle. And naturally, I was just like, well, how? You know, and his parents, you know, his mom was the very first member of search and rescue in Iceland, the very first woman member. It's all volunteer group, and it was, you know, mostly just dudes, and with it for a couple years and just like really digested it. And I was like, you know what? Your relationship with risk and your relationship with pursuing what you love against all the adversities, like doing this career path in Iceland, is not really easy. Like, you know, think about it. Like the waves are, you know, riddled with terrible weather and bad storm systems, and you know he's out there as much as he can trying to score, and just to kind of see it come to life, and then realize that there was this really beautiful connection point where, you know, with his daughter, he really wanted to share what he loved, but at the same time, he really struggled with this idea of risk and managing the responsibilities of what I think society places on him, but also his family and his parents and everybody else. And so you know, this story doesn't have like a beautiful ending in any capacity. It's just like, you know, like he says that line in the movie, you know, he hopes she does life's greatest thing, which is to choose a path that society doesn't choose for her, but chooses her own, right? So that's kind of the thing, and it really is an ode to any parent that's like gone out on a limb and realized that they can't hold their child back from these experiences just because it was traumatic or something. Like we are defined by the risks we've taken and the unknowns that we've faced. And I think it's really just a tribute to parenthood. And I felt like the biggest challenge with that story was, sorry, I've eaten up a lot of time, but was to recreate the scene where somebody's basically dying, knowing that you're not going to do it. We're not going to have his body floating down the river and make it feel cheesy, or we're not going to show somebody rescuing. We're not going to show all this stuff. So what do? Well, we had to, in some capacity, mimic that, and so we wanted to make it as like kind of ethereal and esoteric as possible. And what was interesting was like he's describing this experience where he's getting hypothermic, he's shivering, he's all this stuff, and when we filmed the scene, we wanted to like be in the water and make it chaotic and go to the biggest, scariest waterfall we could think of. And we were out there in like 5mm wetsuits, all hooded up, everything, and we're filming, and we come in and we look at the footage and we're like, it's glacial melt, like my teeth were chattering, our faces are blue, we couldn't speak, everything. And at a certain point you realize you're kind of in this similar experience and you're kind of sharing, there's that like slight bond of when you're creating that footage. And I think in some way that brought it to life a little bit, like enduring and bearing that burden with somebody you care about.
It's embedded filmmaking, and beautifully done. Like I really enjoyed the film. Let's talk about your story of covering like Kimmy. You kind of have dueling stories there. Obviously, I've heard about these divers in Korea and also the ones up in Hokkaido, and they're just incredible women. But and we fortunately have seen a lot of stories of empowerment and female empowerment with a couple of the films so far. So talk about what story you gravitated to first. Was it Kimmy that drew you there, or was it the other way around?
I had seen different pieces about the Haenyeo, which I thought were interesting, but what I found most interesting was the intersection of the two stories together. Kimmy had posted a couple pictures pretty early on in her pregnancy when she was free diving, and she got a lot of slack on Instagram, and a lot of people being like, you shouldn't be diving while you're pregnant, you're jeopardizing, and causing her a lot of doubt and a lot of worry, and to be honest, a lot of these comments were coming from men, and I kind of take a stance like, if you're a pregnant woman, like you should be able to make your own decisions on that. But what I found most interesting was she was naturally gravitating to this like traditional culture that dates back thousands of years. She was Googling it and researching it and like seeking out this wisdom kind of behind the curtain. And so I think the intersection of those two things, so it wasn't necessarily like an either or kind of story. I think it was like our take on what we were trying to get out of meeting the Haenyeo. And for me, Kimmy's like a really big role model of mine. And I think a lot of what her fears before she had Buddy, which was her baby, really resonated with me she's a little bit older than me, and I think in terms of balancing your career while also like accepting that our career forces us to be away from home, so how do you fit having a child in the picture? that was just something that I've always thought about. And so to have a role model of mine be going through the same thing, and then also seeking out these elder, traditional voices, I think all of those things in the mix, it was just a different kind of way to think about pregnancy and think about what it means to become a mom, and really like look to the past for some of these answers of how to like move forward, really. So yeah, it was kind of all of them.
And watching the authentic kind of just the charisma that these divers had, and they just wear it on their face. I mean, I think the only thing they're missing is capes.
Yeah, they're awesome.
They're so. I mean, they're rock stars.
Yeah, I think from I spearfish and dive, but I'm nowhere near Kimmy's level of, like world-class champion. And I think just me knowing enough to be able to know how good Kimmy is. Kimmy constantly was worried. She kept saying like, it's always scary to meet your heroes because you have this idea of who they're going to be, and that sometimes can lead to disappointment. And in the past, since the 60s, 70s or so, since Jeju has become this very touristic kind of destination, we were a little bit worried that they were going to be this cultural artifact that was like, that almost the idea of them was actually more badass than the real them. And like, we were totally wrong. Like they were, it was just cool. They held their own with Kimmy, but also were like working Justin, Kimmy, and I as they were like going up and down. And they are like 70, 80-year-old women. So they are ultimate badass, incredible women that were really doing.
I want to party with them.
Yeah,
for sure.
And they have like in that room, it's like the little stone house. They have like their own little karaoke machine that they like rage after they dive and stuff like that. So they're cool.
So this question goes to all three of you. In each of your films, there's a narration part, and I think for a lot of filmmakers, it's always a difficult thing to find that right tone. And I'm just curious how involved were you in that process of like really making the story not felt, or it didn't feel like it was read, like it was like the real personality coming out.
Well, yeah, we did the interviews while we were shooting up in Tofino, and right away I knew I wasn't going to use him. I wanted to do it differently, and it was just his voice, and there was also an issue I had with, since he's thought it out so well and he's been thinking about it, they were just too perfect. Yeah. And so I was kind of bothered by that, and I was like, this is just too good. And his tone, I still, when I watch it, I go, God, it's just too dark. And I like dark stuff, but for this, I want it to be a little more upbeat and not so gloomy, like this cancer thing's so gloomy. And Ben's he's not a gloomy guy. So I when we were doing the interviews, I was thinking I wasn't going to use them, and then later on, I wanted to redo all these interviews, and Dana Shaw, the editor, he talked me out of it, and I think he's right. He's like, well, this is how Ben talks, and he does talk like that. That is his tone, and I think I was reaching for something that wasn't there, and while we were doing those interviews, I was like, it's not right. But Dana was right. I think if we did it again, it would have been the same thing. It is how he talks. So it worked. And I think all of us can attest to this. When you do something like this, maybe I'm alone here. Maybe not. But I always see, when I see things, I always see where I could have done better. With almost everything I've ever done, afterwards, I always see what I could.
Well, it's understandable to be, self-critical and self-punitive.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Give yourself some slack.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful film.
Yeah. So when I watch that, I always think about that. But in the end, that is how Ben talks, and it is his personality, and it did fit the tone. And at the end of the day, it worked.
Same for you, Chris?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's every film is a bit different. You sometimes go the voiceover route. Sometimes you're doing live interview. Sometimes it's like live action audio sort of thing. And I think with this, it was so challenging working with a subject who English is their second language, because there's just certain enunciations and ways that they would say words where I hear it and I'm like, that just doesn't sound right, or this just isn't going to. So we considered deeply in the beginning, doing the whole thing in Icelandic and then just having subtitles, but there was just too much said. And so what I have done in the past, which is what I did for this film, was I worked with a really talented writer friend of mine, Matt McDonald, who just sat him down and did a really long interview. And Ellie, to be honest, like, he's very personal. Did not want to tell this story. You know, like, this was a kind of an agreement between him and I that, like, we were going to do this because it could potentially help somebody out there, and he was all for it after we kind of came to that conclusion. But it wasn't like he was asking me to make this film, right? So I hired a writer, Matt McDonald, who interviewed him and really extracted like all of it. Like, tell me what happened when you know, this near-death experience, and tell me about Unnur. And he basically extracted all this stuff, and then kind of we re-presented it to him, saying, these are your words, but they're put into a voiceover that we feel like is going to reflect your feelings, but not, you know, put it in somebody else's words. And so basically we read it, and we read it again, and we read it again, and I swear to God, this is probably like the near breaking point of our friendship, was having him do the voiceover 17 times.
People don't understand, because I've been there with friends trying to get, no, you're putting too much, you don't intonate right there.
It's hard, because like I get it, like I know, and I'm always like, I'm willing to do it as many times as it takes, but it's hard when you're describing to somebody who this isn't their first language, how to kind of enunciate here, and like, you know. And so it took a lot. It took like 17 revisions, and it was the hardest thing of the whole process. But it was actually, part of it too is because we're dredging up some really serious emotions for him. I mean, for him to say those things and write those things was incredibly healing. The whole film process was incredibly healing. We hadn't gone back to that waterfall. He hadn't his whole life. So we sat there on the edge, we watched this thing. There was like a lot of moments where like it was just, we wanted to leave him to process it himself. And I think that in the film, because of the length, because it's like a longer short, 17 minutes, I think that the one piece of advice I'd always just taken away was like, if you can just let people sit with what's happening and don't tell them, don't guide them through it, don't give them voiceover or narration or anything, and just let them sit with the music or the audio and let them form their own opinion, do it. And that's kind of what we did at the end, and I feel like that's where the emotion sort of rises to the surface.
And Kimmy,
Sorry,
go ahead, Jeff.
I'm just going to chime in here. I think a lot of people don't realize what Chris is talking about in filmmaking and how difficult those voiceovers are. Like, they're so difficult, and it's for you to watch that, like, you know what's gone through to get there, and I think it'd be great to show the viewer what a bad voiceover is.
Yeah, seriously.
Because most of it's bad, and it's just so hard. So when you're watching, I mean, that film's so beautiful and such a beautiful voiceover, and it doesn't bother you. That's the whole point. A voice has to feel, you gotta wanna, like, it's over and you wanna still hear his voice, like, it's just, but a bad voiceover is just the opposite.
Well,
like,
as you mentioned, when Ben had it so prepared in his mind what to say, it comes out formulaic, and it comes out slightly robotic, and there's like the over-prepared and then the under-prepared, and there's this weird thing in the middle where it needs to feel responsive and emotional, like you're sitting at the bar and someone's telling you the story for the first time. It's such a hard, fine line.
And that's why they have professionals that's what they do. It's you know.
In a world,
Yeah,
exactly. How about same for you? You know, dealing with Kimmy and striking that tone of motherhood, and kind of you know, it just felt so natural to connect and feel for her story.
Yeah, I was really worried because Kimmy has done a bunch of different videos. She's been featured a ton before, and this one was just such a personal subject that we wanted it to definitely feel like it was her voice and not necessarily an interpretation of mine being written out for her. And so I just had her journal a ton before. So the first night, we didn't even film it, but we just like lobbed her up. And then our team was really small. There was like 4 of us out there, and we all were a very tight-knit group. And we just sat in the bedroom of like our Airbnb night 1, and she just like read her entire journal to us, which I think was really helpful for me to get that insight into where she was coming from and how she was processing all of this. And I would say we used the majority of her journal entry for the VO, which was really lucky because that totally could have gone bad and we would have been really effed. But we ended up doing also some interviews, which helped us. So I think in the end, we ended up only doing like 1 pickup line of VO, which worked. But and that is not always the case. But I think it was because it was coming from her heart and something. You know, the project was very loosely formed and very last minute greenlit, and it was something that we always wanted to do, whether or not Patagonia Films was going to support it or not. So I think she just had a lot to say about it, and we just, you know, without even filming, recorded it, and that was kind of the backbone of our piece. Yeah.
Like I said, I got teared up when I saw the baby on the couch.
Same. That was awesome.
Yeah. So all three so incredibly unique and different, beautiful film shorts. I know we're showing Sandbagging Jimmy Chin. What is that tomorrow during the day block? Saturday. What's that? Saturday. Okay. So look forward. I have seen it. I actually texted Jimmy. I'm like, dude, we got to get you tubed this winter. So be sure to put that on your calendar. But a big round of applause, you guys, for our storytellers, filmmakers. Thank you so much. And